Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. After looking at the aviation part of the suggestions passed to the developers in the May of 2019, it's time to have a look at the ground forces stuff, and there's quite a lot here to go through. There's some lists as well. I might actually make one just a single video, just because there's so much to it, but let's get started. The first one is for the Americans, and it's from Blazer93, and he is asking, or she is asking, for the M728 Combat Engineer vehicle. Now, if you don't know what this is, it's basically an M60A1 pattern which has access to a dozer blade on the front of it and a chode gun. The chode gun itself is a 165mm gun. It has 30 rounds attached to it. See it as kind of like the Centurion Avery, apart from the fact that it is for the Americans. Take a standard M60A1, add a chode gun to it with obviously low velocity rounds, which is designed to put large holes in, mostly either stuff which, either buildings or, debris or anything like that. And that's pretty much it. And of course the dozer blade on the front of it. So something that would be pretty fun. But I could definitely see this as a premium or some machine which could be added to the game just as a little bit of fun, maybe even like a gift vehicle. If we look at the precedent set, by stuff like the Centurion Avery and also other combat engineer vehicles, it's probably going to be a premium or a gift if it ever comes to the game. The next article is from Carlson96, and he's talking about how the 90mm T-33 shell should penetrate the Panther hull. Now, this is the 90mm shell, which is sat on the M26 Pershing, the M36 and the T25, and also the Super Hellcat, the AP shell, which is sat on them. Now, understand that since they've put in the new formulae when it comes to the penetration mechanics of all guns and rounds in game, this is a wonderful article, but I'm not sure exactly what it's supposed to change unless it changed some constants when it comes to the equations. The main thing that this article is pointing out is that the AP shot, or the APBC shot I should say, would be able to penetrate the upper glacis of a Panther hull, and obviously through the sourcing it shows that. The next one is a Sturm Panzer line. This is by McPuff, and he has outlined a tech tree line and premium vehicles that he would like to see come to the German tech tree, and it's something that I've personally been looking forward to for a long time. We have a ton of artillery pieces, or SPGs, that could come to the Germans, which wouldn't really be seen as great vehicles, but they would be really fun to have in the game. And we have had some expansion into them, the Brummbauer, of course, and also the Sturmpanzer too, but there are a bunch out there, such as the Vespa, the Hummel, which a lot of people know about, which would be very iconic German vehicles to chuck in the tree. And what McPuff has done here is basically go through each of the vehicles and talk about how, some of them, all of them would be great in their own line in the tech tree. And I'm going to pick out a few here. I could do like a full video on this, but I think instead I'm just going to, talk about generalities and maybe later on do a full video on them. So a lot of these are howitzers, which are mounted upon French chassis. So this 105cm LEFH, the Aufgeschutzwagen FCM36, well, guess what? It's a 105mm, which is mounted on the FCM chassis that you see in game, with, of course, a kind of case put on it as well. Then we have the same gun, the 105mm, which, well, it's not the same gun, it's slightly different, but a 105mm mounted on the B1 chassis. And then we have another one, which is another French artillery tractor, which is armed with the 105mm gun. So there are a bunch of vehicles that the Germans captured in France, which were mounted with artillery pieces on them to basically be used as artillery pieces. You can't say, well, the Germans were incredibly efficient when capturing stuff to put it to different uses, whether it was just to capture vehicles and use them in their place, or convert them into artillery artillery pieces along the way. Then, of course, you have stuff like this, the 105mm LEFH-16 Aufgeschützwagen Auffahrgestell Mark 6 736. Now, this was a British light tank, which was armed with a German howitzer. Once again, would be a captured British tank, or a British light tank, I should say, with the 105 on it. And then we get to some of the larger boys. Once again, the French light tank, which had the 105 on it, and then of course the Waffenträger 105mm, and I believe this was the first one in this, which actually has a German chassis, and this has a chassis which is incredibly close to the Hetzer, but not the same. Then, of course, the Wesp. The Wesp is a Panzer II, which has access to the 105mm on it. One of the most well-known artillery pieces of the war when it comes to Germany. And you can see a common theme here. You know, the 105mm, which the Germans love to use. And then there's obviously this thing, the Husskreik 105mm Waffenträger 4 Husskreik. I know I'm annihilating that, but this was kind of an interesting one. So the way that this vehicle worked, I believe it only got to prototype stage, or there was very low build, like there was about 12 built, and the idea of this machine was it was more of a transporter for the turrets. So you could use, you were able to open the back of the turret, you can see here. So you could create it into an open platform, and the idea is when you got to a battlefield, you could take the turret off and then use it as a stationary artillery piece. So the chassis was more of just moving the gun around instead of actually being, you know, a vehicle that would hold it. And the reason why you would want to put it stationary is to, you know, obviously be useful in offenses and also as stationary defensive positions, and you would have more space if you weren't confined in the turrets to get a better fire rate and also a little less stress on the crew. That was also the reason to open up the back, so you'd have more space to move around in. Then, of course, we have the 105mm Lorraine Schlepper, which once again, this is the 150mm. So we're going from the 105, which was mounted on all of these vehicles, to the 150. These were the two main artillery guns that the Germans used, the 105 and the 150, and this was a French artillery tractor, once again, which had access or mounted on it the 150. You can see the difference in a caliber gun. Then, of course, the Sturmpanzer 1, the Bison, had access to the 150mm. It's a Panzer 1 with 150. Once again, built a gun shield around it. You can see the stress on the suspension here. I feel so bad for it. And that's only rank 1. You see what I mean? There's a lot of vehicles here. Then, of course, you have the Grill Aust 150mm. This is starting tier 2. A Panzer 38T chassis. Which, did I get something wrong? Just want to make sure. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean the Hetzer chassis. I meant the Panzer 38T chassis on this. I apologize. And then the grill with the 150. Basically, take a Panzer 38T, add a little bit of a case around it, and once again, 150mm, because why not? Then the grill, which a lot of people know. This is the Panzer 38T chassis once again, which has the 150mm. You can see there is a common trend here. You're basically taking either chassis which were a little bit older at the time, since this was built in 1943. You're taking older chassis, trying to make them more useful, and you can either do that by converting them to civilian ideas, or making them ammo carriers, or making them troop transports, or making them artillery pieces or SPGs. And that's pretty much what they're doing with all of these vehicles. You'll see a common trend here. You know, once the Panzer 1 becomes surplus to requirements, they add a 150 to it, they make it open top. Once the Panzer 38T, in 1943, you're running into, you know, Panthers, Tigers, Panzer 3s, and mainly Panzer 3s and mainly Panzer 4s, and also a lot of Sturm, Stugs, I should say. A lot of Stugs at the time. You need to find a new use for the Panzer 38T, slap a 150 on it, right? So that's basically, you know, what's going on. So then you got the Stu 42, which is already in game. Then the Sturmpanzer 2, once again, already in game. And then the Sturm Inventariegeschütz, the 33B. This is a Stug with a larger superstructure with the 150 on it. Just remember that this has only the 105. The Stu, so then you're getting an upgraded superstructure and the 150. Quite slow, very heavy, lot of strain on the suspension, as a lot of these machines had. Then you have the 150mm Panzerkampfwagen 3 Aus H. So this is a Panzer III chassis, the Aus H model, which was modified to have the 150mm. You can see how low this superstructure is. Kind of like, if you look at this, it's quite highly built to protect the crew from all sides. Same with this machine, but with this one, incredibly low to the chassis itself. Then, of course, the Hummel, the one that everybody knows, whether that's because it's been used in a lot of movies and games, or whether it's because it was, well, widely produced. They made 724 of these, produced in 1943. It's got the 150mm SFH-18. It's got around about 10 to 30 millimeters of armor, so definitely hull breakable. And it's a Panzer IV chassis that this is sat on. So this would be one of the most known and, one of the most built artillery pieces that the Germans had access to. So for me, this would be the one which would be lovely to see in the game, even if we don't get the Sturmpanzer branch for the German tree. Then you've got this, which is the 150mm, which was built on top of the Hetzer chassis. This was only one prototype, and, it still had pretty decent armor on it, because it had the Hetzer armor on the front. The only issue with it, of course, is that Hetzer chassis was already under stress, and you're adding, quite a large gun to it. Then, of course, the Brummbär, or the Sturmpanzer IV, which we have with the 150mm. Then the Sturmpanzer IV with the 150mm, or the Stu, the other Brummbär, which was a heavily armored assault gun based on the Panzer IV chassis. And then, of course, at rank 5, you would have the Big Bertha, the Sturmtiger, as it's known, or the Sturmpanzer 6. So this was a Tiger 1 chassis, which had mounted on it a 380mm rocket launcher. They built nearly about 20 of these. The idea of them was that they were supposed to be used on an offensive capacity, but because of, the state of the war in 1943, they were only really ever used in a defensive way. They were used, though, in the Warsaw Uprising, of all things, which is just kind of hilarious in a way. But yeah, this machine obviously was pretty well armored as well, 150mm on the front sloped, and with the 380mm rocket launcher, it's going to be able to pack a hell of a punch. There's actually a user mission out there that I've done a video on of the Sturmtiger, so if you want to see what it would look like in game, make sure to check out that video. But overall, there is a lot of information here, and you can see that they go through all the different guns, the issues that people have brought up, or maybe, Puff has thought about himself, or, videos of these machines as well. So there's a ton of information here when it comes to the machine. So well done to McPuff for this one. This is incredibly comprehensive when it comes to the machines. Then we go to Private Woke, I believe is how you say it, or Volk, who knows. And they're talking about the T-44MS, which is a 60s version of the T-44. Now, obviously, during the 50s and 60s, even the 40s, I suppose, the medium tanks of the Soviet Union were incredibly good. And what they were doing constantly was building new prototypes, trying to work out what worked for, these machines. That's why from the T-44, you get the T-44-100. From the T-54, you get the T-54A and all of its subsequent variants. Well, imagine in the 60s, you have a bunch of aging T-44s. They're just kind of sat around the place. They're not really doing much, and you want to upgrade them to make them more combat viable. So in the 60s, what you do is you produce two models to say, this is what we're going to do with the T-44. You get the T-44M and the T-44MS. Now, the upgrades over the original design are very much interesting. The major two that were added to this machine was a Cyclone stabilized gun platform. It's basically a two-plane stabilizer and an upgraded V54 engine. So they made these things a hell of a lot faster, and they gave it a stabilizer. They kept the ZIS S53 standard gun, which is the 85mm, and they also gave it access to Heat FS, which could pen 250 at 90, or Heat FS 3BK2M, which could pen 300mm at 90 as well. So APC BC, APCR, and 2 Heat FS shells is what this thing could fire. So if you're comparing this to the normal T-44, basically what you're getting is an upgraded engine, a decently upgraded engine, which gives you a lot more horsepower and a lot more power to run around, and a stabilized gun. So the best way to describe this thing would be when kind of like the T-54 to the T-54A, where the T-54A had a slightly better gun because it was two-plane stabilized, where the T-54 didn't. They did the same thing with the T-44, just in the mid-60s of all times. So yeah, I don't know how you would fit this in the game, whether you would do it as a premium or in the tree. But the T-44 that we have in game, it would be nice to see it have some love. It was a great tank back in the day, but nowadays not so much. Alpha Noodle is coming along and talking about the BTR-ZD Shrezet, I believe is how you say it. And if you don't know what the BTR-D series is, I talked about it in one of the videos where we looked at one of CK16's tech trees. It's pretty much just a light platform that you see here, which could have stuff mounted on it, whether it be ATGMs, whether it be stuff like 30mm, or whether it be, well, AA platforms. And that's exactly what we see from the ZD. The ZD was a version of this machine which carried two 23mm guns on the top that you can see here, and it also carried two 7.62mm machine guns. And just to bring it into, I suppose, the modern day, which, you know, is War Thunder, it could also carry shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles in two man-pad teams. This is why the crew of this machine was not just a few people, it was 12 overall. And what you end up with in this machine is just a massive amount of people who have to man this thing to be able to make it fully combat effective. And obviously it doesn't have a lot of armor, but the 23mm would be incredibly good in-game at taking out targets from, you know, many different sides. I don't think it had any access to any radar systems, unless, you know, the missiles themselves, they could maybe add something to it. I'm not precisely sure about that, couldn't find a lot of information on it, but the main thing is, you know, this is a BTR which has two 23mm on top of it, and then if you wanted to, you could add some surface-to-air missiles to it to be able to be guided by the team. The next one is one which I've personally been looking forward to for a long time, and it's from Cade, or Cald, still can't work out what it is, I believe it's Cade, and this is the Alvis Saladin AC, the armoured car. Now, in the 50s, the British still used the AEC armoured car, and they obviously needed a replacement. So what they wanted to work on was something which would be more durable over different land, so whether it be desert, mud, you know, gravel. You wanted something which was a much more stable platform for the people using it. So they wanted to switch from the 4x4 model to the 6x6, which is why this machine has 6 wheels, as you can see. They also wanted to upgun it while also keeping the same amount of armor and the same amount of engine power. So that's what they did. You know, it's 32mm of armor on the front, sloped, plus only 13 on the side, so not a lot. And The main reason for this was to stop, minor cannon fire and also machine gun fire. It had access to the 75mm medium velocity gun on it, and also had access to smoke grenades that you can see here. This was the main version that the British used, but understand this was also built with the air to, or the eye to export. So you get some weird and wonderful versions of the Saladin if you want to. But this one would be the one which you add to the British tech tree. Obviously, with a 75mm, it could fire HE, AP, or HESH, which is very standard for any British gun. So therefore, you're probably looking around 6.3, maybe even lower for this thing, depending on how well the HESH does. It is a very fun little vehicle alongside stuff such as the other vehicles, the Scorpions that we see from the British as well, which have also been passed on to development. And it shows that there is a ton of armored cars up there which you could easily add to the British line, which would be a hell of a lot of fun. So the different versions you have the FV601. This has the high-pressured 76mm on it. It was used for mainly infantry support and as a cheaper alternative to the normal version. Then you have the 601A, which was given a 2-pounder gun, which is, which was kind of funny. But the original design called for a 2-pounder gun, but they got rid of that. And then in the A version, they added back a 2-pounder high-velocity pipsqueak gun, which fired 40 by 438R cartridges. These were APDS rounds, which would match the same penetration shots as the Little John shots, but also be able to fire HE shells through it. So yeah, the claimed performance of this gun was 1,295 meters per second shot, which penetrated 85 millimeters of armor at 60 degrees at 900 millimeters. So that could be an incredibly fun little machine if they ever had it in the game. The next one is the Saladin Swingfire. I think it's pretty obvious what you can see from this. It's just a Saladin which carries 2 ATGM Swingfire missiles on the turret and also 2 in reserve, which you can see behind. So it's pretty much just a Saladin with access to the Swingfire's ATGMs that we have in game. And then we have the big Kahuga. This is the FV601 or the Al Saladin 90. This has a long-barreled 90mm, the 90mm 9046 K Nerga Mark 8, and the turret was made longer as well to accommodate the new gun, or mainly the breech of the gun and the size of the ammunition. This was a prototype which was made in the 80s, which was supposed to be exported. The prototype was tested, but it never really got off the ground. You can see the addition of the turret on the back. You can see it's quite a large bracket back here, very, very big. So yeah, it would be nice to see this machine in the game. It would be a fast little whippet machine, a scouting machine with pretty good tank killing capabilities, but not the best. So the perfect thing that you want in an armored car, which would be able to deal with all surfaces that it faces. The next one is a Type 90. But not only a Type 90, it's a Type 90 with a dozer blade. This is from Tasty 95215. And this machine is known as the TKX-0004. It's technically the 4th prototype of the Type 90 MBT from the Japanese, and it has a mixture of ideas from the Type 90 that we see in game and the Type 94. The main differences between the Type 90 that we have in game and this one is that this used different ammunition, but understand the devs in a developer Q&A have said that they use ammunition as a balancing factor, so therefore it doesn't really matter about that. Obviously you have the dozer blade on the front, which is not too useful in game, but it would give you at least a little bit of spaced armor. Then it has less smoke grenades. It only has 3 smoke grenades per side, which is the same as the Type 74, but I believe the Type 90 has 4 on the side. And also, this is unconfirmed, as it says. It doesn't know if this thing has blowout panels or not. The TKX-0002 did not have blowout panels on it, but it is unconfirmed if the 04 has blowout panels. Obviously, the standard Type 90 MBT has blowout panels for crew survivability, but if you make something which is much more geared towards the engineering standard, would it be needed to have, some blowout panels? Who knows? Maybe they might have decided to add it. But the other stuff is some very minor visual differences, and the main thing to understand is that if they add this to the game, obviously it's slightly different and it is a new vehicle, but it would just be another Type 90. So if Japan is looking for another top tier MBT, well, here you go. You get it in the form of the Type 90, just with a little bit of a dozer blade. The next thing that's been passed to development is from Piev, and it's talking about the Ariete C1 prototype. This is just talking about the Ariete. We obviously have two already in game, and I believe this has just been passed on because of additional information that we have, or the developers would like. So the Ariete P is obviously one of the prototype versions that we have in War Thunder. The other one is supposed to be a main production version, but understand, as always in the prototype stage, a lot of things do change between variations, so therefore this article is nice to read about because it tells you the history of the Ariete, where it came from, and also some of the different variants of prototype that they went through. Obviously, there is that whole classified thing, which I keep harping on about, which is why I'm bored of talking about these vehicles, so I'm just going to move on. The next one is some vehicles that I have hoped to see in game for a very long time, and Cade is once again bringing home the bacon. This is the ELC variations of vehicles, or the Engine Légère de Combat project, and basically these ELC vehicles were designed to be either dropped. They were basically an experimental way of creating vehicles that could be used in incredibly fast actions against enemy vehicles, and also massively lightweight, to even the point of being dropped out of planes and stuff like that. But the main reason for these would be quick response and reaction and aggressive maneuvers with soldiers to support them, but also keep the same tank killing capability of the larger vehicles. So all of these were two-man crews, and they all had different weapon systems on them to provide either some support for the infantry or to provide tank killing capabilities in a very, very small package. There were 6 variants of the tanks, if we also include a 120mm recoilless version, which is always fun. But understand that this never really got off the ground, and the French went in different direction. But all of these vehicles were built, they were tested with their different weapon systems, and what they all share is, of course, a common chassis. So this is the first one. It's called the ELC Even 120mm recoilless, or the Even 120. You can see that what it has on top of it is just the basic chassis, which has access to 4 120mm recoilless guns. So 120mm Brandt guns is what they're known as, 300mm of penetration, and also it has access to the SOFAM 140 horsepower engine. Because this thing was so light, there was no need for a massive engine, so instead you would obviously focus on the guns themselves. You can see how you would load the machine while in the vehicle. Not exactly the most safe, but overall 4 barrels of absolute nightmareness, or nightmare fuel for the enemy tank, does sound a hell of a lot of fun. The next one is the ELC Even 2x30mm, or the Even ELC 30. This is a machine which it's probably one of the highest of the vehicles when it comes to, the height of it. And what you see is obviously the turret area, and it has access to 2 30mm HS-A31 anti-aircraft guns, and this had access to APDS rounds, which could penetrate 100 millimeters of armor at 100 meters. So for me, this would be much more of an anti-infantry or anti-air type of thing instead of an anti-tank. Obviously, it has an oscillating turret on it, as you can see, and it had a one-man turret along with all the rest, with the idea of the 2 crew going down. You can see it in all of its glory here. Once again, exactly the same engine. Then you've got the even ELC 90, which is the one which is most well known, I would say. Actually, no, maybe not, because of the World of Tanks and how it has implemented some of these. So the ELC 90 is just exactly the same as the 30, apart from you take off the 230s and add a 90mm to it. It's a single 90mm Mechar gun, and it was light and compact, so it could fit really well onto the light tank itself, and it should, do a decent amount of damage around the place. This would be, once again, a 2-man crew with exactly the same engine and around about the same weight. Then you've got the even ELC NA2. This machine was a missile system mounted on the ELC chassis. It had access to either 2 SS11s or a single SS12 ATGM, and also it was made by Nord Aviation, which is the same company behind the Nord AA missiles that we've seen that have come to great prevalence in the game, which are mounted on stuff such as the premium G91. But yeah, so SS11s or SS12s, the ATGMs, you could also mount on this monstrosity of a machine. You could see here it is mounting an SS12 and 2 SS11s in some very interesting ways, It's just very, very cool. So yeah, here you go. Maybe these are the configurations instead. So 1 SS12 and 2 SS11s, or 2 SS12s that you can see here. Oh, 4 SS11s, right? Well, oh yeah, I suppose you could mount 4 across the board. So yeah, either 4 SS11s or 2 SS12s, or a combination of both. The second to last one is the AMX ELC, which is one of the most well-known ones. This is the AMX ELC 9055, depending on how you want to see it. It has pretty good gun depression. You might look at this and think, well, how the hell does it aim down? It actually has 8 degrees of gun depression somehow, and it has access to the 90mm D914, which was using a sub-caliber shell for better anti-tank efficiency, and it has a 2-man crew once again. So the main difference between this is, of course, the turret of the rest of them. And this one, which is probably the most well-known, or maybe this one is, who knows, the AMX ELC BIS. This has this one actually had a slightly upgraded engine on it as well. The 1957 version of the AMX ELC 90 BIS had access to another 90mm, which was slightly different. The actual design itself was improved as well. You can see it's slightly different chassis-wise and turret-wise to the other ones. The commander/gunner would actually lay down a little bit in this one, and so would the driver. So understand that, once again, it's a 2-man crew. You can see here, this is how they were positioned right next to each other. And of course, when it comes to it, it had a 170 horsepower engine with the 90mm on it, which I'm sure could fire some version of heat. We are talking about a 1950s vehicle. So a bunch of light tanks which could easily be added to the French, some light tanks for the British, some heavier tanks such as the Type 90 with the Dozer, the T-44 MS, all of the SPG/artillery machines for the Germans. There's a bunch of really cool stuff here, that would be lovely to see in game. I think all of these are wonderful suggestions, and hopefully we do see them. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank B. Young, Blackie, Cyborg James, Daniel Stanton, John Ryman, Martinez, Matati, Moxie, Nito, Nick Graham, Alobralo, Sebastian Corona, Super Cacti, and Elove Goat and Seductive Trash Can for supporting the channel.